Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I'm so thrilled you're here for today's episode. Oh my gosh, this one was just a blast to record. You will hear how much we ping off of each other's work throughout the episode. But I first want to give a warm welcome to so many new listeners who've tuned in this month to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And I want to thank those of you who've been listening now for a while. You are so faithful, showing up every week. And I want to thank you for sharing these episodes with your friends, with your family members. I love seeing new people find this place where every single week we are seeking to grow and to heal and to become what I like to call soul menders, people who are invested in this ongoing work of healing. My guest today is Ian Morgan Cron. He is the bestselling author of The Road Back to You, a renowned speaker, psychotherapist, and host of the Typology podcast. Ian is widely celebrated for his work with the Enneagram, but today we're diving into his powerful new book. It's called The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. Now, here's a little backstory before we jump into today's episode. Just 2 days before I recorded this interview with Ian had me on his Typology podcast. This was coincidental. We didn't realize it until our second interview that we were on each other's calendars for the very same week, and we'd never met before. But we very quickly discovered through both interviews a shared passion for internal family systems, or IFS, which, if you're new to the podcast or to my work, is a therapeutic approach that views the self as made up of different parts. And it's the topic of my first book with Kimberly Miller called Boundaries for Your Soul. So in this conversation today, Ian and I couldn't help ourselves from focusing on the 12 steps through the lens of IFS. And in particular, we talk a lot about firefighters. And firefighters, if you're new to IFS, are the parts of us that react impulsively to put out the flames of emotional pain. These are the parts of us that try to escape or avoid pain primarily through numbing. And while in Ian's case, this led to drug and alcohol addiction, for many of us, these parts of us act out through binge watching television, through scrolling social media, through a daily wine habit, through shopping, or even through fantasy. They do anything to escape or avoid pain. And so working with these parts of us, no matter what your go-to numbing behavior is often a recovery process. In fact, Ian really reframes addiction as a universal human struggle, as something every single one of us has to come to terms with. And so today we explore how the 12 steps can become a trellis or a structure to support growth and healing no matter what we're facing. I loved this conversation. Ian is so real. He's so honest about his own story and his own setbacks, and his insights are so wise, compassionate, and practical. You can pick up a copy of The Fix as well as the accompanying workbook anywhere books are sold. We'll link to it in the show notes. I am thrilled to bring you my conversation with Ian Morgan Cron.
You know, Allison, I am so stoked. We did a podcast earlier this week for when you were on my show, Typology, and I've read your books, and I'm a fan, and I so enjoyed our conversation a couple of days ago that I got up this morning. I'm like, I'm so stoked I'm going to see Allison today.
I feel like there's just this really cool thing where sort of coincidentally, in air quotes, we have these back-to-back interviews. I read your book, and I feel like you're an old friend that I've never met because there's just so much overlap. This book, Ian, just is really powerful. It's really hitting me in places, and there's so much I want to dive into, especially with this idea of, I've thought about this for a long time, that we all in some way, shape, or form are dealing with an addiction. So I want to go there, but I want to start, would you just start by sharing with us a little bit more of your story that you reveal a little bit in the fix for my listeners who really maybe only know you through your work with the Enneagram or through your podcast. Tell us a little bit more about your story and what led to you writing this book.
Yeah, so, I've been a part of 12-step communities. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and I have been a part of 12-step communities for about 35 years. 4 years ago, following a relapse, I went to treatment, and this was obviously a private thing, and I haven't spoken about it publicly over the last, it's almost 5 years ago now. But I have been so beautifully and profoundly transformed by working the 12 steps that I just felt like I got to let people know who maybe don't self-identify as alcoholics or substance use disorder or, overeaters or gamblers or whatever. I wanted everyone to derive the same benefit from the 12 steps that I have as a program for living that is completely consistent with the gospel, and that could really just change people who don't show up in church basements a couple of times a week, but just could really get something from it.
Yeah, it's really powerful how you recast it as something for everyone. And there's a paradox in the title of the book, right? Because you're so real. That's what I love about the opening few chapters of this book. Like, there's just such a raw realness when you kind of describe yourself as that young boy just looking for anything to numb the pain, and that there isn't a quick fix, there isn't a workaround, but that the 12 steps do offer something to us, a scaffolding to us.
Yes. In a way, the 12 steps are a rule of life. The Benedictines had a rule of life and other monastic traditions. And the word rule there actually means trellis in the original language. And so the 12 steps are like a trellis on which we can grow some new ways of being in the world that can help us just live more comfortably with ourselves and our own skins. I also love just talking about internal family systems, which I know is a big thing for you, right? Like, one of the things that internal family systems has helped me to do is to really understand, my journey with addiction. And, there was, as you read in the book, a traumatized, exiled part of me, and it got activated again, and it just resorted, my firefighter, if you will, just woke up and went, oh, I know, I have a solution.
I saw that in the part of the book when you describe, and I don't want to give it away for readers. It's just, you're such a great writer. So read the book, listener. But there's this moment where you describe in the book visiting a doctor, and that part of you, I saw that part of you, you could just picture it. It just was like, wait a minute, Adderall? Oh, ding, ding, ding. After maybe, I don't know how many years of kind of dormancy had you had, right? Where you were in sobriety, that part of you could just see it. You could almost visualize the movie character of that part of you just came to life and went for it. So Ian, what I want to do, I love to try to walk through the steps and think about this lens of the different parts of us as we're walking through the steps. Before we dive into that, I first, for all my listeners who maybe don't identify as a typical quote unquote addict, right? Someone who's addicted to maybe where we think about drugs or alcohol. When you talk about addiction, tell me a little bit about how it applies to all of us.
Yeah, so let me just give you my definition of addiction. It's sort of an amended version that I've taken from lots of sources. But I think an addiction is an unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. So who doesn't have that? You know, I mean, whether it's alcohol or drugs, but it could be people-pleasing, it could be shopping, it could be food, it could be gambling, it could be, sex, it could be porn, it could be, and we're just not people who have one addiction. I like to laugh and say that, I can't get up in the morning without getting out of bed and tripping over one of my many addictions,
Control,
And,
you list. I mean, you go through drama,
perfectionism,
all the different ways that we are resorting to something to soothe pain instead of sitting with what's hard.
And, the thing is, as our firefighters have good intentions, right? And, I would say that my firefighter addiction believes that there is an external solution to my internal problem. And of course, that's like going to the hardware store to buy bread. It's like you're going to the wrong place, man. Thank you, but no thank you.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So this is great. So we talk a lot about numbing, right? And so to me, I think about those firefighters. These are the parts of us that reach for something to put out the flames of pain. And they might not always show up. Like when I was reading, you tell your story about being in college and being two people, being a Christian. It's like I'm going to Christian groups and then I'm partying with my frat brothers. You were really living this double life. You talk about it. But I was thinking, I've described my own college years in that way. It's just that the double life part, the things that I was doing to soothe pain were more quote unquote socially acceptable, or maybe more things I could keep hidden, or maybe even more Christian acceptable. The incessant people pleasing or workaholism. But that's what we're really talking about. These parts of us that want to put out those flames of pain. They can become more overt addictions, but we're all kind of doing it again in some way. So let's talk about, Ian, that first step. What's that moment of recognizing something has to change?
Yeah, I think the first step, the spiritual principle embedded in it really is honesty. It's reaching this moment where we say, you know what, I've tried everything to overcome this behavior or this relationship with a dysfunctional relationship like codependency or a substance that kind of helps me dissociate or get out of the pain that I'm feeling. And it's beginning to have feels like significant negative consequences in my life. And I just can't seem to stop no matter what I do. And so just the admission that on my own unaided will, I can't stop this. I've tried. And my life's getting unmanageable. And if that word feels weird to you, try intolerable. It's just not working and I need help. And I love it when I always say that in some ways, the three most brave words a person can say is, I need help.
Yeah. It's that real admission, that naming of this is out of control. And it's not immediately rushing to fixing it, which is my go-to. Is that what we mean by surrender? It's here and I actually can't fix it.
Yeah. In fact, you could bundle those first three steps, right? As being step one, I can't. Step two, God can. Step three, I think I'll let him.
Wow. Okay. I can't. God can. And then there's a will. There's a movement of the will there too. It's not God doesn't magically zap. It's God can. And then step three, I will cooperate. I will work with God.
Yeah. And the word I love, Allison, is consent. I feel like so much of the spiritual life is built on that idea of giving God consent to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And that's not easy because the will and the ego are pretty big forces, right? But basically to say, God, I give you consent to flood me with the grace necessary and the relationship with you that will render my addictive patterns unnecessary, right? Sometimes I love this prayer. God, help me to find in you what I look for in blank. So something like, God, help me to find in you what I look for in workaholism or in achievement or in perfection or in Netflix, or in alcohol, or in porn, or whatever your thing is, people pleasing, and just being able to recognize that there are forces in our lives governing them from the shadows that need our healing, and giving God consent to rewire us.
So how do you, if we think about these first 3 steps, you're going to get the deep dive in the book, but just taking them in this way, is it something you then have to practice daily?
Yeah.
Hourly?
Yeah. This is so good, Allison. You're a great interviewer. So my sponsor, and for people who don't know, in 12-step communities, a sponsor is somebody who's been in the program longer than you and has worked the steps and helps you to do the same, walks you through them, and then is just a great sounding board and a counselor, right? Advisor to you. And this guy's awesome. He's from East Tennessee. He's got a thick country accent, right? And he just says stuff to me that's like weirdly mystical sometimes, and I'm like, where did you get that? And he said to me, Ian, after you work these steps long enough, the numbers just fall away. And I thought, wow, he's right. Like, in other words, yes, in the beginning, you're very conscious. I'm working step 1, I'm working step 2, I'm working step 3. And then after you've been at it for a couple of minutes, you discover that you're reflexively living the principles of the program all day, every day. And sometimes it's very conscious. Like, I could get up in the morning and say, boy, I admit that not only am I powerless over alcohol, but I am powerless over my fear of disappointing people. And it makes my life unmanageable today. And then I go to step 2, which is I just acknowledge that there's a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. And then I say, step 3, listen, God, I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over to your care. And I trust that with my cooperation and consent, that you can remove this defective character from me so that I can be free. And of course, and I hope we circle around to this, my understanding of my inner architecture has really been influenced by internal family systems. And it has given me a language and a construct for doing internal work, for giving God consent. Like, hey, God, I got this firefighter inside. It's called people pleasing because I don't want to disappoint people. And no matter how hard I've tried, I can't seem to get this part to back off, or not back off, but to accept my leadership of my essential self. Can you help restore me to sanity here? And again, what I'm doing here is I've created kind of a hybrid of internal family systems with my recovery work. And I'm just telling you, it has been incredibly helpful. And I need so much to thank you for the work you've done, because it's really helped me have a clarity and a language for talking about my healing.
I love that. When you're saying that, what it reminds me of, one of the things we say in IFS work sometimes is we're just trying to get a paper's width's distance from that part of us, especially those firefighters, because they're just so all-consuming. And so what I hear in that is just this, if we can even name it to God, oh boy, that part of me is so active right now. That's putting just that tiniest sliver of space between us and that part. And there's power in that. We don't have to just make it go away altogether. We've just placed just a tiny hair of distance there that gives us just a little bit more agency.
I love that. And I love this idea, number one, that I now know when I have blended with these parts of me, because I'm so over-identified and consumed. And secondly, when that happens, when I say, I've come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity, step 2, that to me is like that paper-thin separation between my true self or my spirit-led self and this other part. And it's like, oh, there's a part of me that's not traumatized, that wasn't sexually abused as a kid, that wasn't affected by my dad's alcoholism and drug addiction, that is separate from that part of me that would seek to find a chemical solution to my problems. And God placed that in me, and I've come to believe that. So super helpful.
It's like creating just a little more inner awareness of other parts of you. Starting the new year with health goals is common, but sticking to them, that's the hard part, right? And that's where getting a little expert support can make all the difference. I'm a big fan of expert support, especially in areas where I don't know very much. And that's why I'm so excited to tell you about Faye. Faye is a groundbreaking platform that connects you directly with your own personal registered dietitian. Faye makes expert nutrition guidance both accessible and affordable. And because they accept over 700 insurance plans, getting started could cost you absolutely nothing out of pocket. With Faye, it's not about temporary diets, but developing a lasting, healthy relationship with food. That is so important to me. And Faye's dietitians work one-on-one to tailor a nutrition plan just for you, focusing on your unique needs and health goals. Signing up is simple, and whether you prefer virtual or in-person sessions, Faye fits into your lifestyle seamlessly. They're dedicated to providing personalized care that makes a real difference. And now, achieve lasting results with the help of a registered dietitian through Faye. Listeners of The Best of You can qualify to see a registered dietitian for as little as $0 by visiting faynutrition.com/bestofyou. That's Faye, F-A-Y, nutrition.com/bestofyou. One last time, that's faynutrition.com/bestofyou. And make sure you use our URL so they know I sent you. Sometimes this time of year, it can feel a little gloomy, especially after the holiday rush. Even those of us who embrace the chilly weather sometimes need something to break up a long winter. And one thing I love to do every once in a while is treat myself to a little something special. I don't want to spend a fortune on it, and that's where Quince comes in. With Quince, you can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price. Something everyone needs in their closet, in my opinion, is Quince's iconic Mongolian cashmere sweater, starting at just $50. You can also check out their Italian leather handbags, washable silk skirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. I paired my new black Quince cashmere sweater with one of their silk skirts for the holidays, and I got so many compliments. I felt great. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/bestofyou for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's quince.com/bestofyou to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/bestofyou. So let's think about these first three steps. So it sounds like what you're saying is that first step is sort of the acknowledgement of the blended. I'm blended. Baseline is that this part of me, this firefighter part of me, is all that I am if I just start here.
And, there's so many ways that we're powerless, right? And what's so funny? There's an irony here. The moment you admit powerlessness, you're given a superpower. That's the strangest thing. Have you ever had a moment where you just realized I'm out of ammo and you're like, I'm out of ammo. Like I've done everything. And, for those listening, if you're codependent, you may be over a kid that you can't get to stop drinking or drugging or has a behavior that you want to change. And you realize I've done everything. I've tried everything and I am powerless. And then what happens is this dilation in the chest sometimes where everything finally relaxes. It's like all the parts go, finally, you've admitted what we've known all along.
Yes, it's oddly a relief. And
Yes.
It's not giving up. It's very different energy. It's surrender, but it's very hard to describe. You just said that so well. It's almost just like all the parts, there's nothing more I can do.
Yeah, and what you've just described beautifully is the difference between surrender and resignation. So surrender is not resignation. Surrender is this, people who are resigned to their life tend to be glum and resentful, right? It's like, oh, I give up, all right? And it's like, that's not, we might even argue that that's another part talking.
I think those are protector parts. I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But surrender is like, especially, when you surrender to a higher power, God, as I understand him, I think all the parts kind of go, phew.
Yes. Yes. You know what it reminds me as you're describing this? It's actually, I do agree with you. I think giving up or resignation is a manager part that's actually just trying to cope that way. Surrender is that true self. It's clarity. It's, I actually don't have control. I mean, our essential self from a Christian perspective understands that and actually leads right naturally to that step too, because I'm not God. I'm not the ultimate power here. Yeah.
Yeah. I have my sponsor, again, so funny, Steve. One day he said to me, Ian, we are well past any conversation about you fixing you.
It's such a relief. I mean, it's such a paradox. And I don't know why we fight so hard to fix ourselves, but it is such a relief. So I love that. Okay, so that's those first three. The I can't, God can. And then I love that. I consent, God. It's bending the knee in a way.
Yes, absolutely. So in a way, we could parse the 12 steps like this. 1 through 3 is about clarifying and mending our relationship with God. 4 through 7 is about mending and clarifying our relationship with ourselves. 8 and 9 are about mending and clarifying our relationship with others. And then 10 through 12 is developing a lifestyle and a way of being in the world that supports ongoing health in each of those domains of our life, And so when you get to 4 and 5, 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, what this means is that some people first read this, and they're like, man, I don't want to go there.
Because those words are tough.
Yeah, those words are tough, man. Like, I don't want to go there. But really, I don't know anyone who's done a 4th and 5th step who said anything other than, man, that was one of the most healing experiences of my life. I mean, look, so much of our work as therapists, right, is making the unconscious conscious, right? And so what we do in this situation is with a non-blaming gaze and with a non-judgmental, compassionate spirit, we look inside, we take an inventory of ourselves. It should never be shaming, blaming, unkind, or anything, but it needs to be rigorously honest, right? And then when we make that inventory, we then go out and we admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, it sounds like hard language. I could reframe it in some different ways, but it is really, really important that, I love what Gabor Mate says that, when you have secrets, when you keep secrets about yourself, you are essentially at war with yourself. And I think there's some truth in that, so we need to find a trusted other or a community where we can speak our truth. And it's really important.
So this is the one that's the hardest for me, is that, because you say it really clearly, it's being really honest with ourselves, God, and another human. And I'm pretty vigorously honest with myself. I'm pretty vigorously honest with God. That other human is hard. Now, I imagine this could be different for different people. I'm curious for you, which one of those you struggle with the most, and how do you find that? That's one of the things I love about the 12 steps model is that sponsor is finding that safe person. I think a therapist can be that, but especially when you've been hurt by someone, I think of a lot of listeners. I think about this idea of listeners who have been hurt sometimes in church settings with sort of public confessions, where that's been used shamingly.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I feel a lot of tenderness toward folks where it's like, how do you find that trust that's really vulnerable when we're being really vigorously honest with ourselves and we're saying to someone, I'm naming this to someone else.
Yeah. So in the book, and particularly in the workbook, I really help people through this. So for example, in the workbook, I have a sample letter that you can actually give someone that instructs them. So you really do have to pick a trustworthy person. It shouldn't be your spouse, your partner, one of your kids. It shouldn't be a friend. I think to find a pastor or a therapist or somebody in your life that is safe. And if you don't have that person, that needs to be a separate conversation, right? Like, wow, I don't actually have a real friend like that, right? And it's really helpful if that person has been through this themselves in some way, done a 5th step themselves. But there are instructions about how to do it. I get fairly granular in those 2 chapters to help people really think through who that person is. But I don't think you can skip these. You can't decide, well, I'm just going to stick to God myself. It's really important, certainly with your therapist. If you can't do it with your therapist, something's wrong, right?
I love that. I do want to let the listener know that workbook is so practical because I'd never heard somebody say that so clearly as you say it, that it's probably not your spouse. And that makes sense, right? If you think about it, because some of the things we're really admitting honestly could be hurtful to the people. There are different conversations one needs to have with their spouse or a best friend, but it really is the role of a pastor, a spiritual director. Sometimes I think about my mom is a really devout Catholic. I was raised in sort of a mixed Catholic/evangelical home, and I kind of envy the practice of confession.
Absolutely.
Right? It's a built-in place to go tell another human, whatever we think about it theologically, this is what's actually happening in my heart. And that person has the capacity to hold that on our behalf.
Yes. And James, of course, doesn't let us off the hook. And Bill Wilson, who wrote the 12 Steps, they derive from a Christian organization called the Oxford Movement. And so people just need to know that, right? Like there's nothing in the 12 steps that is inconsistent or discontinuous with the teachings of Jesus. And they actually derive from a tradition that was very faithful and orthodox in its understanding of the human person and God. And, James does say, confess your sins to one another that you might be healed, right? So it's not like the scriptures let us off the hook in this regard. Like they really say, now, here's what people typically say. They'll say, well, I just don't have to go to another human being to ask forgiveness. I can only receive that from God, right? And that's sort of an anti-Catholic stance left over from centuries of Protestant problems. But really, that person isn't going to forgive you. In the best setting, they're going to give you an assurance of pardon, that you have already been pardoned.
And embodied, that is so scriptural, that body of Christ matters.
Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And by the way, you could decide that there are pieces of your 4th step inventory that I'm going to share this with my friend, but I got 5 things on there I'm actually just going to share with my therapist, right? And so you just have to exercise discernment, like be smart with it. But as my sponsor likes to say, I keep quoting Steve, he likes to say, Ian, not everybody needs to know everything about you, but somebody needs to know everything.
That's so good. It's really revolutionary. I've been interested and intrigued by the 12 steps for years, but this book really makes it accessible in this way for all of us. It really makes it make sense for how it applies to all of us. It's so helpful. So keep going then. Ian, what's next? We're doing this fearless moral inventory. We're really getting honest with God, ourselves, and at least one other human. And then what? Where are we going after that?
So after that, we go to 6 and 7, right? Now, what has come up in doing that fearless moral inventory of ourselves and sharing it with God and ourselves and another human being are some character defects. Like we realize, okay, well, I struggle with resentment with so-and-so, and it's because I'm envious of them, right? That's the real reason. Or, for me, for example, I had to realize that, after an episode of sexual abuse when I was about 9 years old, that even though nothing in there, like there was nothing I did wrong, but after the fact, I built my identity in some ways around that experience. And I used it as playing the victim card. And that was my part in it. You know what I mean? Like after the fact, not the actual event, but after the fact. And so one of my defects of character is, playing the victim card sometimes, right? And just for nomenclature, character defects always put me off when I first heard it because it's like, I'm already ashamed enough. I don't really need to be told it's my defects, right? I just defective. I don't like the word. So sometimes I call it a character defense because these are things that I came up with. These were strategies a part of me came up with to explain my experience to myself and to others. And so, all of my worst behaviors in life are usually driven by a part of me that came up with a strategy that is maladaptive, just doesn't work. And that gives me a little bit more compassion and understanding for those character issues that keep dogging me. So we just say in those 2 steps, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. That's 6. And then humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings is 7. Now, super important. This is all about humility. It's recognizing I can't get rid of these on my own. In fact, God doesn't even want me to take on that responsibility. Most people hear those steps and they go, I'm entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And then what we end up doing is trying to do it on our own, on our own unaided willpower, right? And it just doesn't work. It's just an exercise in futility.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
So, Ian, for fun just for a second, let's think about this from an IFS lens, because I'm thinking about removing character defects. You've just said something so important. When there's trauma in the background and a part of you has coped with a very real trauma that wasn't your fault. And so if we think about parts language and defects, it's almost like I hear you saying in these steps, we're revealing the strategy that part picked up that was not helpful, but we don't want to get rid of the part. We want that part to unburden that poor coping strategy, that unhealthy coping strategy, so that it can be restored to its healthy, whole, and proper state.
Okay, you're so killer. I love this. So, number one, what I love about the 12 steps is that they're so beautifully written and framed. Bill Wilson, who authored them, used to say, these are suggestions. And there's no single right way to do the steps, right? It's just very open-ended and kind. And so one of the things that we can do is, and Bill Wilson wouldn't object. He'd say, great, blend it with IFS and look at it through that lens. And so you could say that this part of me came up with the idea that if I just play the victim card, I can leverage this painful experience and use it to manipulate others to feel sorry for me and not ask too much of me, right? And it's like, and then you then say, God, can you, and humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings, step 7, can you just help this part of me unburden him or herself or itself so that it no longer has to rely on that strategy to help me get through the life?
Yeah, I love that. Because that part is probably very young. You know, that sounds like a very young part that's trying to cope. And what might that part become if it can get rid of that strategy, doesn't need that strategy any longer?
Yes, exactly. And, I just always remind people, this might take a minute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to say, you've done this for a while.
Yeah. It's like, this might take a minute. But, we begin the journey. I love, again, Bill Wilson. He says, we are not saints. The point is, we are trying to live along spiritual lines. We live by the principle of progress, not perfection.
That's him. I've heard that. That's interesting. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
That's beautiful. It's the slow, slow work.
Isn't that beautiful? I love you said that, because there's a prayer by Teilhard de Chardin, the great Catholic theologian and thinker, and he opens one of his most beautiful prayers with the line, above all, trust in the slow work of God.
That's right.
Isn't that
That's
beautiful?
Right. Yes, I love that. And it's so beautiful when you think about that overlay of kind of getting to that step and then God just being so excited to meet that part that picked up that strategy and just kind of shine the mirror, but so gently and lovingly, inviting that part to release that. I mean, it's just, wow. Why wouldn't we want to do this every day?
Yeah, exactly. So when you get to 8 and 9, right, now we've dealt with self. Now we move into others, right? So 8 is made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, right? So basically, it's a really simple step. There's nothing to it, right? It's just, I'm going to make a list of people I've harmed in my life as either a direct result of my addiction or addictive pattern, or just make a list of everybody, right? And then make direct amends to those people wherever possible. It's not always possible, right? Sometimes the person is dead. Sometimes we don't know where that person is now and can't find them. And we don't do it when it would hurt them, if our sharing with them something that we did would actually cause more pain than be of service to them. But again, this is just, could it be more scriptural? It's like, when you go to the temple and you realize that you've harmed somebody, before you do another thing, run out, fix that, and then come back, right? And so this is a difficult pair of steps, but, so many people carry the burden of unprocessed or unconscious resentment and hurt. And if they can be agents of reconciliation in the world, again, what we're doing here isn't just healing our relationship with them. It's also unburdening ourselves of shame and guilt and unresolved brokenness in relationships. And by the way, these steps can take time. We don't have to rush. You're not in a race against yourself, right? So it's just helpful to have a plan, because most people don't have a plan for transformation.
It's so good. And I love what you're saying about not rushing it. That's the willpower part of us that powers through, right? You might get to that point and like, I can't do it, God. Well, that's the back to step one. I can't do it. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
That's the radical honesty.
Yeah. In fact, I talk in the fix about this idea. I call it the hell no, I'm never going to make up to that schmuck list. And those are the 4 or 5 people in my life who I just would rather eat glass than make an amends to them.
This is why you're going to love the book. There's a lot
Right?
of honesty in it.
I mean, seriously, like I've got people in my life that I feel have hurt me much worse than I ever hurt them. And if you think I'm going to go, and yet the steps are like, listen, pal, all you have to do is clean your side of the street. That's it. Clean your side of the street. They may not cop to what they did wrong in the relationship, but you need to cop to what you did. And you will come out, by the way, unburdened by shame and guilt and the feelings of something being left outstanding. And when that happens, the likelihood of you returning to old addictive patterns, right, is going to be infinitely less.
Doesn't mean you have to become best friends with them.
Heck no.
It just means you're doing your side of the street. One of the things in IFS, when you have a part that's holding on to something, maybe the person's no longer with us, or maybe it's somebody toxic that you can't, it wouldn't be wise to go to.
Right, that's right.
We do some visualizations. You imagine the part. But again, that might be the case where you've told a therapist, you've told someone, but then in the quiet of your own spirit, you're still releasing that resentment in some way, shape, or form in such a healthy way.
Yeah, and in the book, I talk about some practices people can do to soften and gentle their hearts towards those people who we need to make an amends. Because sometimes it's important before we make an amends to actually have forgiven the person for what they did to us, so that we don't go into that conversation with some passive aggressive energy that wants to say, well, I did this, but you did that, and it's like, it's just, how do I really understand that that person has broken parts too? Bill Wilson says they are sick too, and they need the same love and tolerance that we would offer a friend who was sick. I just find that to be so beautiful.
This is it. I feel like after this interview, I'm going to go do a bunch of journaling because I can just feel it, right? There's those places in my own heart. And everything you're saying, I just realized this is a lifetime's work, right? This is an ongoing work, layer upon layer upon layer. I really hear that. This takes time, you keep saying, and I hear that in what you're saying.
And everybody goes at their own pace, right? And, for some people, they go through the steps for the first time really quickly, and they're students of it. Now, remember, some people come in on fire, right? Like they're on fire. They got to get to work. They have to remove the obstacles to achieve what I would call physical and emotional sobriety. And by the way, you and I could have a long conversation about emotional sobriety, like what that means, because through the lens of IFS, we are talking about achieving emotional and spiritual sobriety, right? Just one way of thinking about it, right? Maybe we could talk about emotional sobriety as inhabiting and living out of our spirit-led self, that's the state of emotional sobriety, and just having a conscious awareness of its presence in our lives. Maybe in some ways, I was actually thinking about this in a meeting this morning, that so much of step work is about activating and bringing into our awareness the spirit-led self and operating from there more and more and more and more. And these steps help to support that journey in a way that's really great. So, 10 through 12 is just about 10 is continuing to take personal inventory and promptly admitting when we're wrong, right? Like it's just owning your stuff every day, right? It's pausing to go back after a snappy moment with your partner and say, you know what? I wasn't my best self just then. Or this part of me was upset. Or I ask your forgiveness for my not coming from a healthier place just then, right?
Yeah. So the daily work, yeah.
Daily work. And then 11 is about seeking through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And then the final one is, and this is big, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to our fellow sufferers, that's how I would put it, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So that is the point of the 12 steps. The point of the 12 steps is not to get you to stop drinking or taking drugs or watch porn or any of the crazy strategies we come up with, right, to deal with our pain. It's actually to have a spiritual awakening. That's the whole purpose. That is the stated purpose of the 12 steps. Is I want you, Bill Wilson would have said, to have a spiritual awakening that now renders your need for these strategies unnecessary. And then to carry that message of hope to other people.
Which is what you're doing. I just want to say, when you said that, carry it to fellow sufferers. That's what I felt as I dug into your book this week. I thought, oh, you're doing that. You're giving it out of your own suffering, which has been not insignificant. And you're bringing it to others. And isn't that the beauty of sort of the upside down gospel?
Yes.
I love that idea that you carry it on to others and bring that freedom to others. I really want to take a sidetrack into what you said about emotional sobriety, because it reminds me of what you asked me when you interviewed me about what the goal of this work of IFS. And I said harmony, right? And that idea of it's balancing all of the different states inside of us in a way that allows for the different parts, but creates a melody. It's where that spirit-led self is leading. And when you say sobriety, it kind of reminded me of that. We'll have to have another conversation, because I feel like you and I could do a whole another deep dive around this. But that's a really beautiful thought. I'm going to keep thinking about that emotional sobriety.
There's a term I love, and I can't believe I've never heard a sermon on it. And actually, it's a word that the Buddhists use. Now, I am a Christian, but I have learned a lot from Buddhists about the different things. And I'm a critical thinker, so I'm able to kind of go, oh, that illuminates the gospel in a way I haven't heard before. And equanimity, I would define as being the ability to maintain emotional balance and wholeness in the face of whatever life throws at you.
That's it. That's the word, equanimity. Yeah, it's not doing away with the complexity, but it's leading yourself through it without losing yourself, without losing connection to God, to the Holy Spirit. It's really beautiful work. I just want to ask you, as we close, I ask all my guests 2 questions. Ian, what would you say to that younger you? Maybe that younger you who picked up some of the strategies. What would you want him to know if you could be with him now?
So you know what? I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and someone was doing a Q&A with me. I was on stage, and this person said, what would you tell your 10-year-old self? And when something comes out of your mouth before you can edit it, it just like comes out of your mouth, and then you're having an out-of-body experience. You're like, did I just say that? I said, you are not what happened to you. And I'm actually getting a little puddly right now when I say it, because, I think we tend to over-identify what happened to us in our histories, and we assign it a level of truth and meaning that it doesn't deserve. And then we become strangely loyal to that interpretation of our history. And it took me a long time to get this, and the steps really helped, was to realize I am not what happened to me. So that is something I would definitely tell my younger self.
That's beautiful. What's bringing out the best of you right now?
Well, a convenient answer would be to say the 12 steps and get my book. But they do continue to bring out the best in me by working them every day. Can I just also say my wife is bringing out the best in me? I've been married 38 years. We've been through a lot together. And we've reached a point in our relationship where there's a kind of beautiful, comfortable companionship and friendship. We just dance well together, And also we're very different, like I'm a complex kind of artist type and, all that stuff. And she's a beautiful peacemaker type. And, she loves to plant sunflowers and make meals and, just go to yoga and just live her life very peaceably. I used to look at her like, okay, this is boring. And it's like, I realized one day I went, no, that's an aspect of God that's being revealed to me. And so she's my teacher.
Oh, that's beautiful. Tell everyone where they can find your book, the workbook, and your work.
Yeah, thanks so much. So the book is available. The title is The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. We have kind of an interesting offer right now. If you pre-order, it's available for pre-order. It doesn't drop until January 28th. But if you pre-order now, we'll send a free copy of Chapter 1 to you. So the way to do that is to go to ianmorgancron.com/getyourdownload. And, we'll tell you how to show that you pre-ordered it. And then we'll send you a link to read the first chapter so you can get a head start on it.
It's well worth it. You won't be able to put it down. So please take advantage of that. This is such a good book. I would say right now, reading it is bringing out the best in me. It's been a real answer to prayer to work through some of the things in my own life. That structure, like you said, that scaffolding is so helpful, Ian. So I'm just so grateful for you and for the fact that you're sharing this with fellow sufferers.
Yeah, well, Allison, dare I say, I hope one day we get an opportunity to make good trouble together.
I'm thinking something. I'm thinking the same thing.
It would be so fun to do a gathering of people around, internal family systems and addictions together to help people find the next step in their journey toward disentangling themselves from the things that they feel powerless to do anything about.
Yeah, I sense a real invitation there. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.